How many Ukrainian refugees is the United States taking in? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's Libertarian Angle, show that brings you all the principled, uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
Good to see you too, and to be with our viewers and listeners one more time.
Yeah, good to be back with y'all. If you're new to FFF, come and visit us at fff.org for 32 years of principled, uncompromising articles and perspectives and conferences and seminars and videos and podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and buy my new book. We just launched my new book. It's entitled An Encounter with Evil, the Abraham Zapruder Story. I'm very confident that you're going to tremendously enjoy this book. Give me your feedback on it once you buy it and read it. Of course, leave a ratings and feedback at Amazon. But Richard, let's turn back to the crisis in Ukraine. As you know, this invasion by Russia of Ukraine has produced a tremendous refugee crisis. Tens of thousands of people have fled the country. They're moving into Poland and other countries, Eastern Europe, Western Europe. But and of course, there's tremendous sympathy among the American people for these refugees and tremendous animosity against Russia, rightly so. But one of the interesting aspects of this is that none of these, or I should say very few of these refugees, seem to be coming to the United States. And the reason for that is America's system of immigration controls, or at least that's the excuse that their U.S. officials are giving as to why they can't permit more people in. That apparently there's this long process, bureaucratic process. You got to stand in line. You got to wait your turn. Got to fill out the forms. You got to wait till we review your forms. I mean, after all, Richard, some of those Ukrainian people could be terrorists. And so we've got to be real careful about it. And if it takes time and they have to remain in Ukraine and get bombed or killed, well, that's going to be unfortunate. So we've got this same horror taking place with this socialist system of immigration controls that really took place in the 1930s. You'll recall that Adolf Hitler, during that period of time, was willing to let Jews get out of Germany. But all the Western countries said, oh, no, we can't take them. We got immigration controls, including Franklin Roosevelt, the great humanitarian, that when they said, are you going to let in these Jews? And Hitler's willing to let go. Oh, well, we have the quota system. We've already filled our quota. And so, of course, we end up with all those Jews being killed in the Holocaust. And it was best reflected in that great movie called Voyage of the Damned, where those German refugees, Jewish refugees, were denied entry into Cuba and then later in Miami, and were forced to return to Nazi Germany. Fortunately, some of the Western European countries accepted them before they got back to Germany, but then later, a lot of them ended up getting killed after the Nazis invaded France and the Low Countries and so forth. So we've got the same thing here. We've got this evil system of immigration controls that is being used to not deny refugees who are trying to save their lives from coming to the United States. And so I can't help but wonder how genuine this compassion and this sense of compassion that a lot of American staters are demonstrating for the Ukrainian people. It's almost like I get the feeling of, we love you, but we don't love you that much. We don't want you to come over here and live here. So if you have to stay there and die, well, we feel really bad about that, but we'll keep sending you weapons to try to resist this invasion. So I get the sense there's that same sense of hypocrisy that has come to characterize the United States. I think I also ought to mention that I heard an interview with Governor Abbott of Texas a couple of days ago, in which he was lamenting and complaining about the Democrats' open borders policy. That because there too many immigrants were coming across the Mexican border, and he was saying, "See, Joe Biden's open border policy." That is so inane. I mean, it really goes to show you how ignorant Republicans can be. Let me explain to you, Governor Abbott, in case you happen to be listening or watching this program. Open borders has nothing to do with Joe Biden's immigration policies. Open borders is what we have here domestically in the United States. People are free to cross from Oklahoma into Texas and vice versa without ever seeing an immigration official, border patrol, or whatever. That's what open borders is. And the only ones who really favor open borders are us libertarians. Joe Biden may favor a Berlin fence instead of a Berlin wall along the southern border, which is what Republicans favor. But that doesn't make him open borders. It just means that his method of enforcing immigration controls is different from that of Republicans. We libertarians, Richard, are really carrying the only moral high ground in this. You know, with all the death and destruction that comes from immigration controls, people drowning in the Rio Grande, dying in deserts, being shot by Border Patrol, and now this death and destruction in Ukraine with people trying to escape and can't come to the United States. We libertarians are really the only ones that are holding the moral high ground. We favor open borders. We favor a system where people are free to cross back and forth, and goods and services also, free trade and open immigration. And heaven forbid that libertarians ever adopt the position about Democrats and Republicans, because we're the only hope for mankind there is. What do you think?
Well, I want to sort of add and amplify a few of your points, but I want to start out with this. It's often argued that the reason why a lot of the political establishment oppose wider borders in America, into America, is because unlike previous waves of immigrants, these are people who are not white. And therefore, these border restrictions, demands for walls and hurdles to get over, are all instances of a racist spirit in America. Well, if the immigration restrictions were purely or primarily based upon a race consciousness, then what we would be seeing here today is heavier restrictions on the Mexican border and open arms to Ukrainians. After all, they're Europeans, they're Caucasians. But the fact is, the immigration restrictions are colorblind. They are an equal opportunity barrier to the freedom of people to enter this country, whether to reside or to practice religious freedom, which they may not have had in their home country, or to escape from political oppression, or to avoid being bombed and killed in the middle of a military conflict that they have found themselves in their home country. This shows that it is the institutional mindset of the idea that we determine how people may enter or exit the country, that we determine whether we consider them deserving of being allowed to live or work or visit the United States. You were pointing out that right now there are Ukrainians escaping from the horrors of war, literal war. I think most, if not all of us, have seen these videos on the news or social media of the horrific conditions under which many are living and have been escaping from, with this massive bombing by the Russians, entire cities practically obliterated, and the hardships that these people are experiencing. And over 3 million, according to the United Nations, now about 3.2 million people have left Ukraine, a good number to Poland, but now being dispersed and spread out through the rest of Europe. Now, to their credit, the Europeans have shown a benevolence, a charity, a philanthropy, and a sympathy of supplying these people with food and shelter and medical supplies as they enter these Western countries, beginning with Poland. Many people are opening their own homes, saying, well, I have an attic, I have a spare bedroom. The willingness to take in a family and people who they know nothing about, merely from an empathy for human beings suffering from these tragedies. But what about the United States? I forget whether it was the New York Times or the Washington Post, Jacob, but just 4 or 5 days ago, I read a piece in which some Ukrainian Americans wanted to bring people over here to get them away from the conflict. And these were not strangers. These are Ukrainian Americans who wish to bring over relatives, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin. And what have they been told by the US State Department? Well, there is a procedure, and they have to fill out the forms, and they're going to have to go through a vetting process. And then that will culminate in an interview that will determine whether we consider them deserving of the privilege of escaping to America from war. And let's look at the schedule. We have some interviews open in September. I'm just telling what either the New York Times or the Washington Post article recounted. Okay, this is madness. This is madness.
Let me interrupt you
And
just
what
for a
is behind
second.
this, Jacob? Yeah, they might be a terrorist. Give me a break. Who? Okay, first of all, the Ukrainians are themselves do not have perfectly clean hands. They're allowing their own people to flee Ukraine, but only the women and children, right? The men are not allowed to go there between 16 and 60 because, we may have to call upon them to fight the Russians. Well, that's a contradiction. You're fighting for freedom, but you're saying all the male people have to stay there and fight whether they feel called upon or not. And I'm not challenging the fact that many Ukrainians are freely volunteering, including women as well as the men, to face Russian tanks and missiles. But the fact is, we're basically talking about women and children. Oh, yes, that 2-year-old Ukrainian kid, he might be the mad bomber. We can't let him in America. I mean, this is not only shocking, it is deeply immoral, Jacob.
Yeah, well, I was going to interrupt you just to add a phrase. I love Hannah Arendt's phrase, the banality of evil.
Yes.
These bureaucrats saying we have rules, we have regulations, we don't have a choice. We have to follow our rules and regulations here. If you have to wait till September and your children get bombed in the meantime, well, rules are rules. And then, Richard, this we talked about this in a previous episode of Libertarian Angle about how there's so much outpouring of sympathy and outrage against Russia, but I love reading all the mainstream press on this because not one of them has ever offered to go over there to Ukraine to fight the Russians. And okay, you mentioned that Ukraine is forcing every man from 16 years old to 60 to stay inside the country, something like that. Well, that implies that everybody within that age group can perform a service here in resistance to this war. Well, that means that every American man who is between 16 and 60 can go over there and help. They'd be more than willing to help out, to take their help. And yet all these pontificators in the mainstream press writing their op-eds and their editorials about what we need to do and what we need to do, and none of them is going over there to fight, which I find absolutely fascinating. Now, I did read an article that there was a small group of veterans, military veterans, that were getting together to go over there. I don't know if they ended up doing that or not, but if they're able to do it, then why not all these op-ed writers? Why not all these editorial writers? Why not all these pundits and pontificators and so forth? So you've got a double whammy here. It's like, well, we love you, but we're not going to go and fight with you. And, oh, we love you, and no, you can't come here and live with us. You'll just have to stay over there. Just hypocrisy to the max as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, the fact is, there again, according to the newspaper accounts, both American and British that I've caught, there are hundreds, maybe several thousands of Europeans, of which there is a sizable number of Americans, former U.S. military servicemen, as well as Americans who have never picked up a gun before, who actually are in transit, are actually there now. ready to air their shoulder to fighting the Russians. Now, as I think I've mentioned before, when these types of things have come up, and I would like to take a moment to reiterate it. This is a long tradition in American history that Americans have gone voluntarily as individuals to assist those who they feel are being oppressed. There's the famous example, which the press has brought out, about the thousands of Americans who went to Spain in the 1930s during the Spanish Civil War, most of them to fight on the Republican side, which ended up being dominated by Stalin and the socialists. But nonetheless, they were free individuals guided by their ideology and belief of what was right to do. But they didn't ask for tax dollars. They didn't ask for U.S. subsidies to transport them from America over to Spain. All these people did it on their own dime. And fine, you did that. There were Americans who joined Simon Bolivar's liberation armies to defeat the Spanish in Central and South America, and for the independence of what we now view as the countries of South America on a political map. This has had a long tradition, and for Americans to want to do this, more power to them. And I can give one more example in reverse. It's not given much attention, but during the American Civil War of the 1860s, there were numerous Europeans who, as private individuals, came over to the United States to fight in the Union Army, believing that they were fighting against the evil of slavery, just as there was a smaller number of Europeans who went and fought for the Confederacy, but they did so of their own free will, as private individuals on their own dime, risking their own life and not expecting their home countries to go to war. Now, again, if I can just add one other thing, if you read these accounts in the American press, rather than praising these people most of the time, yes, these are Americans who have a deep sense of empathy and sympathy and a call to want to personally risk their life to fight for freedom wherever it exists. A lot of these articles have an undertone. These are just crazy Americans, and who are they to go over there and risk their lives, and what training do they have? And so on the one hand, they praise the Ukrainians, and they have sympathy for Europeans who are opening their doors, and they all want U.S. dollars to be spent to arm the Ukrainians. But the idea of not just reporting, but giving a tipping of a hat in terms of American principle of voluntarism, that these are individuals who are choosing by their conscience to go over and give their personal life-threatening support to the Ukrainians, that tends to be poo-pooed, and I'm actually offended by that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let me bring up another aspect of this. That what the U.S. did in Iraq and Afghanistan is, in my opinion, no different in principle from what the Russians have done to Ukraine here. And yet, during the entire time that the CIA and the Pentagon were wreaking massive death and destruction, I mean, they've killed a lot more people in Afghanistan and Iraq than the Russians have killed in Ukraine by a factor of many. I mean, I think the estimates I've seen is 800,000 or 900,000 people that the U.S. has killed in those two countries. And throughout that time, there was virtually no sympathy for the victims at all. All the sympathy was with the troops, with the U.S. government. And those of us that express sympathy for the victims, I mean, people would come down on us hard. Even in the very beginning, you and I have talked about this, that during the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, when those of us libertarians opposed those invasions, I mean, I've never been inundated by so much hate mail before, as that, oh, you love the terrorists and you're defending them. And when we pointed out that U.S. foreign policy had brought about these terrorist attacks, people went ballistic, just like, they went ballistic when Ron Paul pointed it out in that famous debate with Giuliani. In other words, the sympathy for victims of aggression and these invasions and occupations seems to only go toward the official enemies of the United States, without recognizing that there's a lot of evil that's right here in our very own government. And in my church, every Sunday after the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, we were exhorted to pray for the troops. And that was the daily mantra, as you recall: support the troops, support the troops, support the troops. And I wrote, I would periodically write a letter to my minister saying, why is it that we're never exhorted to pray for the victims? And he ignored me. I never got a response, but I'm sure he sat there befuddled of why should an American feel sympathy toward victims of the U.S. government? Our loyalty is always to the government. The other thing I want to point out here is the founding principles of this country, which some of which were very, very wonderful principles. Now, we know there were some bad ones like slavery and tariffs and so forth, women's rights, but there were some sound founding principles, and two of them were non-intervention. Well, let me say three of them. One of them was non-interventionism. Another was don't get involved in entangling alliances with other countries, such as NATO. And three, open immigration. That was a phenomenal combination of principles here. What Americans were saying, our ancestors, and the reason I bring this up is that Americans need to do a lot of soul searching here, because we're involved in this crisis here, and it's bringing us closer to all-out nuclear war and worldwide devastation, or at least devastation of Russia and the United States through nuclear bombs, than we've been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Is that we need to do some soul searching in this country, and that soul searching has got to be in large part based on an examination of what our founding principles were. And so the American people founded a system that said, look, a lot of bad things are going to happen in the world. We know that, like invasions, like this invasion here, or dictatorships, or brutality, or civil wars, or famines. But our country is not going to send troops abroad in search of these monsters to destroy. In fact, our military is going to be very small. They had a very small military throughout the 19th century. Enough to quell revolts by Indians or Native Americans, but not enough to get embroiled in all these foreign wars. But they said, look, we will wish you well. If Americans want to go help you, they're free to do that. But if you want to get out and you're able to get out, you will always know that there is one country that you can come to that will not forcibly return you to your homeland, and that's the United States. When you combine those three principles of don't get involved in these entangling alliances, don't be intervening with weapon supplying and NATO's and all this other stuff, but open your borders to the free movements of people. Boy, Richard, I don't think you could get a better set of policies than that.
Yeah, it all goes back to the idea of what is the guiding principle of a country. Is it that government owns you, or that you own yourself and the government is a hired agent to secure your liberty from aggressions from at home and abroad? The very notion of passports and immigration barriers is that the government owns people. We will decide whether we're adding you to our controlled population. We will decide by issuing a passport whether we will allow you to leave the country. It's basically saying that you are nationalized. You're the property of another country, and we'll decide whether we're going to let you change where you reside to become part of our property. And if you're an American, we're going to decide whether we're going to allow you to leave as our property, and either temporarily or permanently choose to be the property of another government. This is not the principle upon which a free society should be based. As you've often pointed out, just as there is free movement of goods and investment and people across the 50 United States, an absolute open border, unrestricted free trade zone, that should be the guiding economic and philosophical principle between the United States and the rest of the world. Government should not tell people where they can invest or with whom they could trade, and they should not be telling people where they can travel to or who, for peaceful, non-aggressive purposes, may enter the United States and either come for a visit or to stay for the rest of their life. Again, as long as they do not break the fundamental laws of abridging other people's life, liberty, and property.
Right, and they shouldn't be punishing Americans for violating their stupid rules. There shouldn't be any rules at all on the free movements of goods and services and people. But the fact that they actually prosecute Americans for violating their sanctions is just phenomenal to me. That Americans don't see that this is not just trying to harm people of other countries, these sanctions and embargoes. They're actually an infringement, a destruction of the economic liberty and private property rights of the American people. The other factor that we ought to consider in this is the police state that comes with immigration controls and trade restrictions. I was just down in my hometown of Laredo, Texas, which is on the border. And when I was growing up, we had a farm on the Rio Grande, and we irrigated out of the Rio Grande. We had a pump down there, and so we would go down there periodically to work on the pump. And you could see the river. You couldn't see it very well because the brush was so high. But periodically, the Border Patrol would just come onto our farm to look for illegal immigrants. No warrant, no anything. I mean, that's what a police state's all about. And this last trip I went down, our farm is now developed. There's houses there, and there's a public park down there on the river where our pump was located. And they've torn down all the brush, so it's a beautiful sight. You can see the whole Rio Grande down there now. But as we go down there just to see, we were there showing my nephews and nieces where we had grown up. There was like two big vans of Border Patrol, and they were dressed. I don't know if they were soldiers or not, but they were dressed in soldier-like garb. And that's what a police state is these people are like omnipresent. And then when we were leaving Laredo, driving on IH-35, you come over a crest of a hill, and there's this huge immigration station. I mean, you think you're still in Mexico and entering the United States because it's that huge. And you have to go through the little checkpoints, and you have to answer their stupid questions. And if you don't answer their satisfaction, there's lanes that they guide you over. I mean, this is the police state that comes with an immigration control system. These domestic highway checkpoints, they're in Cuba. I've been in Cuba. They have domestic highway checkpoints there. They characterize totalitarian countries. This has no place in a free society, Richard.
A good number of years ago, I'm forgetting when I wrote the article, it was for Future Freedom Foundation, one of my regular articles, when I was writing on these kind of themes. And I'm forgetting the name of the town on the Canadian-US border. But the town sits right on the border. And around the beginning of the 20th century, someone had donated money to build a library across the border so that there was one entrance on the American side and one entrance on the Canadian side. So, the free movement of people through this library, and if you will, the exchange of ideas, right? A library. Well, following 9/11, they put a barrier right through the building, including a lecture hall that had been built adjacent to it, and there was a stripe right through the seats in the auditorium as well as through the library floor, separating stacks of books. This is America, and that's Canada, and those Canadians just can't cross over anymore, even if it's just one stack of books away from the volume they wanted. Madness.
Did they put a wall there, like a Berlin Wall?
Well, Americans could enter in through their side of this library, but there were restrictions on the Canadian side that people could not freely enter in from the Canadian side anymore without going through some type of security check. Because you never know when a wild and crazy Canadian is going to want to blow up some books.
Yeah, no, Richard, that's why, we cannot settle for reform. I mean, this whole system is rotten to the core. And the only way out of it is through libertarianism. I mean, like if libertarianism didn't exist, there'd be reason for despair and depression. But the fact that libertarianism exists as a philosophy is enough to provide everyone with hope, because it provides a way out of this morass. We see this crisis in Ukraine. It comes on the heels of exiting a 20-year occupation, a deadly and destructive occupation in Afghanistan and Iraq, where they're still occupying Iraq. We tend to forget these things now in the context of what Russia has done to Ukraine, but we can't forget them. And then we've got the out of control spending, the debt, the inflation. this whole country is on a trajectory that is headed into a very bad direction, a perfect storm of crises and death, suffering, destruction, impoverishment. But there's one way out of it, and that's libertarianism. And that's why I say we keep raising people's vision to a higher level, not on how do we fix this system, how do we reform it, but instead, how do we achieve a free society? All right, on that note, we'll wrap things up. Thanks, y'all, for tuning in. Again, my new book, An Encounter with Evil, the Abraham Zapruder story. I guarantee you you're going to like it. It's available at Amazon, $9.95 for the Kindle, $14.95 for the print version. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscribe to FFF Daily, which we have strived to make the best libertarian commentary page on the internet for, gosh, at least 20 years now. My daily blog is included 5 days a week, original articles, links to other really sound articles, and my monthly journal, Future of Freedom, that Richard writes for every month, as I do. And of course, we do our show here at the Libertarian Angle. Richard, greatly enjoyed the visit as always. Look forward to talking to you next week.
Till next time.